Jack Lamb when he brought in the moratorium.
And which people was that? Oh yes.
He brought in the moratorium that the people who couldn't keep up the payments on their homes weren't thrown out of their homes.
That's right. You could be thrown out for rent, but not for if you owned them.
Yes, well I remember that at the time, that he was the organiser of that.
That was one of the things he was very proud of.
Yes.
That and his family endowment, he called it. They were the first in Australia to have child endowment.
Yes. Well, I left the coast and I went straight to Crown Street, where again you were so involved with the work and the poverty and the district nursing. We had to go out and deliver babies in the slums. When I say the slums, it was just that the hospital was situated in the slums.
In the houses.
And we went out with two girls, and we always were encouraged and told what we had to do was we wore white dog collars over an ungodly purple uniform with black flowers in it. The matron chose that uniform purposely because she didn't want nurses to get any highfalutin ideas of how nice they looked, and she thought this was the ugliest pattern she could find, a dark purple with black flowers.
They didn't think you should enjoy yourself in those days.
But when it faded to lilac it was quite attractive. However, we wore those little dog collars, and when we went round the streets at night we had to make sure these were open, hoping that the people would always respect the nurse's collar, because they knew that we would be out on duty, because one of them would stay in the house and one would have to go up to the nearest public telephone by herself to report every now and then back to the sister in charge at the hospital, because we were only trainees at the time.
And they left you on your own to manage the whole confinement?
Yes, and if anything went wrong we had to report back.
Yes.
There was one incident about this, that one young doctor went out with a nurse. He was they had medical students there, and he went out with a nurse and he reported back to the senior sister in charge and said, oh, she's all right, she's got this, that and the other, and she's got a pulse of 40. And the sister said, what, a pulse of 40? He said, oh yes. He said, that's all right. He said, Napoleon had it. Some people have a normal pulse of 40. He said, Napoleon had a normal pulse of 40. She said, yes, I'll be out there straight away. Napoleon wasn't having a baby. However,
what was this? Was it when in these little houses? What were they like?
They were terrible.
How big? What were the
tiny little cottages? But I remember one particular one. There were about 10 Chinese children all sitting on a stairway eating rice with chopsticks. And we went into this little bedroom. The husbands were always very good, and they always kept us supplied with hot water. They seemed to think they were always at the door, do you want hot water? And the women at that time, looking back, I think what a hide I had. I wouldn't do it now, but they used to say, oh, you girls are only so young, isn't there someone older, haven't you got a doctor? But we were so full of confidence that we thought we knew everything, and we hoped to God that we did know everything. But however, then the day nurse would go back the next day and take over, and she would visit them.
And you would actually, if the confinements happened at night, you'd
we'd deliver the baby. Yes, we had in our certificate we had to have so many cases on district.
And you wouldn't be under anyone, did they? I mean,
no.
They train you in the hospital a bit first, wouldn't
they?
Yes,
it was just, we were on the same, the other nurse and myself, we both were, well, I was 24, 25 at the time, and the other girl would have been the same. We were just on the same training, and we had to, looking back now, I would not have the courage to do it, I wouldn't. And
Did you lose many cases? Did you lose many patients?
I didn't, no. Then another woman couldn't speak a word of English. Another one I went to, and we were all gloved up, sterile gowns, sterile gloves, waiting for the delivery of the baby. There was an old iron bedstead that all these young people are always chasing around now, and the place was just full of fleas. And I had to rub my back like this against the back of the bedstead. However, eventually the baby was born, and we got back home to the quarters, and I got into the bathroom and stripped my clothes off, and absolutely alive with fleas. The people were very good though. They were very you know, the husbands were always tried to be helpful, and personally on my district I never had any, we only had to do 6 I think to get our certificate, but I fortunately didn't have any great hemorrhages or any trouble and so on.
What, would you go out and get the telephone and call for aid if you...
Yes, that's why one girl, one girl had to go, and that's why we particularly wore that collar, because they'd know that we were in desperation.
I wonder how long these women would get to stay in bed in that situation. Probably only a couple of days.
Well, if they had 10 children and so, they'd be up probably the next day. But of course, when I had my own children, some years later, and in all that period of time, for the person who could go into a private hospital, it was
done?
10 to 12 days.
Well, then when I had my children, they were encouraging you to get up to 2 days.
That's right.
The wheel went round again.
Yes.
But getting up was a bit different to doing the work for 10 children.
Well,
just
that's
getting
the
up
point.
in a hospital
That
ward
is the
isn't
point.
quite the same, is it?
So, of course, in those days we often think, well, it's good to be in hospital for a fortnight because their hard-working mother, I mean, that was her only chance of having a bit of break.
Could you go to hospital and have your babies if you wanted to, or did some of them choose to stay home and have them?
A lot of them chose to stay home. Actually,
What did you do after you went? How long did you stay at Crown Street?
6 months.
Just the 6 months.
Got my certificate.
You didn't stay on the staff there.
No, got my certificate. Had 30 shillings. Went home for Christmas. Spent the 30 shillings in getting home, the fares. Had no money for any Christmas presents for anyone. Didn't say anything. Didn't let anyone know that I didn't have any money. I got a job doing a private patient where I got another 30 shillings. And worked for, then I went back to Sydney, and for about 18 months I worked for nothing in private homes.
Couldn't you get a job?
Oh no. Well, thousands
you
of
couldn't, once you came out of the hospital, they wouldn't put you on the staff.
Thousands of unemployed.
Nurses.
Thousands of unemployed. No, you had to be asked, you couldn't just say I want to be on the staff. See, they got to say there were 70 in our class. Well, you were one of the honoured ones if you were asked to stay on the staff.
Invited back, sort of.
Actually, you had to be a friend of the matron.
Yes, I've heard that now.
She was a Presbyterian, I was a Catholic.
Oh.
70 in our class, and the only girl chosen out of that class to be on the staff was a Presbyterian, a daughter of a Presbyterian, and the matron was a Presbyterian, so...
And that was only, it was a 69 out of 70 didn't get jobs there.
Oh, yes, there was only one staff nurse put on, out of 60, out of a class of 70.
Were you very understaffed? Were the hospitals understaffed?
Oh, well, you see, we worked a 12-hour day. So the girls now work an 8-hour day, so it takes 3 nurses today to work, with the time off, to work for 1 of ours, you see. Anyway, then if you look up the papers, there'd only be one job, if there'd be that, and there'd be thousands after that one job. So eventually, there was an ad in the paper for a nurse at a hospital in Sydney like our Cheltenham. It was called Liverpool. And I lined up with 14 others to be interviewed by the matron. Now the matron was a Scotch woman, a very fine woman. I became very friendly with her for years afterwards. She was a World War I army sister, and I looked like a friend of hers who was killed in the war, so she gave me the job. And I went to Liverpool State Hospital.
A geriatric hospital, was it?
Like our Cheltenham.
Like Cheltenham, yes.
It was not done in our day for nurses to work in that sort of hospital.
That's why there were only 14 after it.
Yes, it was geriatric, and it was government. And I went to this hospital with a big pay of £2 a week. I was staying at my sister's in Manly, and I borrowed money to buy a uniform for 12 and sixpence, a veil for 18 pence, which is now $2.50, and a pair of white shoes for 12 and 6, which they are now $18.
And that was all you had?
And that was all I had, and I went to this place. I had a room to myself, the modern quarters, and there I began a few years' work. It was most interesting. The people were all returned soldiers of World War One, deadbeats of the Depression, alcoholics, people who had been taking drugs. They were drug addicts in those days. Am I speaking loud?
No.
Oh. And I had a lot of experience in what was known as C ward, because a C ward was devoted to the district hospital. We had a lot of road accidents. I was there on night duty. The doctor was always drunk and wouldn't come on duty, and I had to look after these patients and stitch them up, which a nurse is not supposed to do. But by the time I sutured them up, I kept my fingers crossed and hoped that all was well. But I had a lot of we might call it rough experience in that particular ward on night duty. I did night duty there. Well, I worked there until I was married in 1936, so that I worked there for 2 years, I think, in all the various wards. It was a very fascinating old place. The building was a building of greenways. And there was also a ward there of completely incurable cancer patients, and they were absolutely appalling. However, the place today, of course, is a modern hospital. You wouldn't recognise the whole building's built all around.
They kept the same building there, the old Greenway building?
The old Greenway building is still there, but I don't know what they're doing with it. But there's a whole new Liverpool State District Hospital there.
I know Liverpool.
Yes.
Now, when you were working before you went to Liverpool, these jobs you were working for nothing, how did you get them? You just
well, mainly through a few doctors that I knew who would say, well, Mrs. So-and-so she wants a nurse, but she can't afford to pay you, but if you'd like to go. It was a case by word of mouth, we were passed on.
You wouldn't get anything?
You wouldn't get anything.
Just your keep?
Just your keep.
And would you be working professional hours, full hours?
You had a room there, and you'd work whenever you were quiet. If a patient wanted you at night and so on, you'd just get up and do it. There's one particular place that I resented very much, because they had two cars and fur coach galore, and had a house of beautiful furniture, and yet they didn't pay me anything a week staying there.
What did you do for pocket money in that?
Well, we just didn't have any.
Well, wouldn't be able to go out much, sure?
No, just didn't have any.
What sort of a social life would you live at this time?
None at all. None at all.
Yet you were only young, weren't you?
Oh, 32. Oh, my middle 20s, middle 25.
And you would be virtually, what sort of a social life would you have had when you were at the hospital?
Oh, good. In our quarters, good. We had dances. Every class would have a ball every 3 months. We were always short of men, but some of the other girls' brothers would come along. We had a marvellous social life there. We had the old golf links. The place was built right on the sea. We had beach picnics, swimming, tennis. We had a lovely life at the coast, and that's what I say, when it all finished, we were like a ship without a mast. We didn't know what to do. We were coming out into this world that we knew nothing about, and there were times I thought, well, I wonder, will I go and train in another hospital to get the security, you know.
Golly.
But however, people say that the Depression ended in 1932, but my youngest brother, who had been thrown out of work with one of the shops that went bung in the country, he went to the city to try and get a job in a shop, in a mercery store, and he couldn't get one. He walked and walked, and eventually he turned up at my sister's place. Her husband fortunately had a job all the time. He was in a big chain grocery store, and he came to her place. This was 1938, without any shoes on, absolutely destitute. He hadn't eaten for ages because he was rather an independent boy and didn't want to live at home. He was just trying, and he turned up at her place of desperation. However, when the war started, he joined the Air Force, and he said the best thing that ever happened in my life was when the war started. He said, I loved the training, I loved the Air Force, I had good meals, I had good clothes, and I saw London. He said, and I was very sorry when the war ended.
They wanted men then, didn't they?
Yes, and he was...
Many people
he'd
were very bitter
also
about
been
that.
untrained because my father couldn't afford to keep him at school, and he left school before he should have. See, he wasn't qualified for anything really. He had no education for doing much.
Yeah.
And but he was very pleased when the war ended. Of course, they wanted to train him as an air gunner. Not an air gunner, a wireless operator, but he didn't have the educational background and couldn't keep up with the you know, technical need for the particular job. So then he got a job and has been for years and years and loves it on the never married, but he's a steward on a boat.
Yes, yes.
Been all around the world and
That's
loves
right.
every bit of it and has never married. But
A
however,
lot of people missed their marrying time because they had no money, you know, at that time.
Yes.
For years, and they might have been meeting girls.
yes,
They were battling around the country with nothing.
yes, that's the point.
What happened to your other brother, the one who played the music? Or was that your...
He eventually got a job building those huge silos. Now, he was very deaf. He had a lot of ear trouble. He had scarlet fever when he was young, which left him with a discharging ear. He should have had a mastoid. But as we lived in the country and doctors didn't know much about it, he was just left with this discharging ear. Always had head dizziness, head noises, and yet he used to build these silos up at terrific heights. He was his most splendid worker, and one boss that he had came to my father and said, can't you tell him to come off the job at 6 o'clock, because in those days unions were becoming pronounced, and he was going to be in trouble for keeping this boy working longer. But he would not work. He said, why stop working until the sun goes down?
Real farm boy.
He was a magnificent worker. However, he married on nothing, and practically nothing, and had married a very fine girl, and after he had 2 or 3 children, he was killed off a motorbike. His tools were crushed into his stomach, and he was killed off a motorbike. He was still quite young at the time.
Yeah, so the war didn't do him any good.
No.
No.
But however, the general aspect of these years, 1936, the shops were loaded with goods, but people still didn't have money to buy them.
No.
And then there was unemployment, and then when the war started, well, the whole of Australia set up changed. There were jobs, there was scarcities, and as you know the story from then on.
When did you get married?
1936.
And what was your husband doing?
Journalist.
Was he indeed? What
He was originally. He's a Duntroon graduate. He's older than I am. Melbourne grabber, Duntroon, World War One. Came back from the war and broke into journalism. He was on the Melbourne Herald.
So was my brother-in-law, and his name's Keane.
Really?